Yes, I right?
Good evening. I would like to call the budget workshop of the Board of Education to order at 6 p.m. A reminder that workshops are a working meeting of the Board of Education that are open to the public. There is no time allotted for public comment. If you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to the board or the superintendent. Great, so just wanted to follow up with a few questions that we had outstanding that you wanted information on. So first, let's see. So a couple things that you have in your packet. So there's a couple different scenarios, so we'll talk about it in a minute. The administrative and the capital budgets, the drafts have not changed since our last discussion. So they're in your packet, but those are the same as last time. The program budget was balanced at the request of the board to see what that would look like line by line, balance for the negative 2.19% allowable tax levy. So also in your packet are the different scenarios that you asked us to come up with. So scenario 1 is working on the allowable tax levy of negative 2.91%. So just as a reminder, so the first page is the revenue expense page. So that shows you the negative balance of 771,000 before it was balanced, so that you could just be reminded of what that deficit was that we were working with at the last, with our last updated information. And then attached to that, page 1B is the budget balanced, then at the negative 2.91. So it has an overall expenses increase to match our revenue increase. So it's an overall increase of 10.3%, and it's balanced. That is with the proposed changes that we would be making to those positions. Oh, and I did forget to add that we did distribute this afternoon. We updated it with those final requests that you had made on Friday. So over the weekend, we updated it and sent it out today. So we do have a Q&A document out there. So for anybody who hasn't seen that, there are some links to some documents that you might find helpful and informative as part of the Q&A, but we did take all of the questions from the last meeting and some we've received in the meantime. And thank you, Karen, for assisting with that. So any questions on this one? This is the one we've been working on so far, the negative 2.9. That last page you will see, and this is on the other scenarios as well, is it shows the tax rate per thousand, so you can see what that is, and then in terms of the dollar change amount on that proposed. So the median home value right now, according to Karen's research, is about 137,000.
Yeah, and on this assumption tax page, that's based on this current year's valuations, which the taxable value does change every year. But since everybody, well, most district or most towns are at 100%, it should still maintain at it'd be the negative number, right? That you see. Yeah. So it's pretty close, but know that it's based on this year's number that could change slightly.
And that's just on the
Right.
valuation. It's not on,
Right.
who's getting star and
Right.
those types of things.
Yeah.
Just gives you an idea of what that impact would be. There are some seats on this side over here. Mrs. Crandall, can you prop that door? Is there a way to maybe prop that door open for people? They want to come in. There's a little button on the top that you press. Yeah. There we go. Thank you. Okay. All right, so if you have questions, just interrupt us. And so that's scenario 2. So there's been a lot of questions about what if we go at 0%? So anything over the negative 2.91% requires super majority of 60% approval of the voters. So at 0%, we would have a net gain from this other scenario of $148,494. I think, so if that was the route that the board would like to take, that would be, one position. It's not going to recoup all 7 positions. It's one position and then some. But as we've discussed, we have really, I reviewed this with the faculty today. We have really tapped out a lot of our reserves that we can access, all of our appropriated fund balance, debt service. We don't have a lot of contingency in this budget. So, it's just something to be aware of. It would not fully fund 2 additional positions, and I would caution about going over that. No.
But it wouldn't fund 2 because we wouldn't have enough kind of
No,
kind of wiggle room, if,
Right.
for lack of a better phrase,
Right.
but just
right.
room if something happens.
So remember, right, and remember, so positions aren't just the salary step that someone's
Right.
on, it's benefits.
Yeah.
There's, so really, most positions are probably in essence of 80-ish
And,
and up.
depending on
for-
which one you're talking about.
Right, depending on which one you're talking about. So really for 2 positions, and that's depending, there need to be a discussion. There are a few options out there of what that position would be. My recommendation would be, I think that section in 3rd grade, that would be very large, that cohort, or pre-K, but, there's merits to adding any of them back.
And even to go to 0, we have to have a supermajority.
Yeah. Yes,
The understanding that having to get to a supermajority is 60%. And town tax is going up 8%, water levy going up 2%. I'm not hearing a whole lot of support for that in the community. And history in the state has shown pretty clearly that if you put a vote up for a budget up for a supermajority vote and it gets voted down, the likelihood of your second shot of getting voted down is also very high, which then would put us in contingency and cost us another $2 million.
it could potentially cost us more with some of the,
Well,
some of the restrictions.
we'd be
yeah.
back on the 22-23 budget funding. Correct? If the budget was shot down twice.
Right.
And as I said, history in this state has shown if it's shot down once, it's probably gonna go down a second
Right.
time.
The other thing is that if we go in over the negative 2.91, we did speak to the state, it is something that we could do, but it's very clear, they sent us, we have to be very clear in the resolution. It needs to be very clear that that it'll say that requires a tax levy increase of the amount which exceeds the statutory tax levy increase limit of negative 2.91%. So in essence, it's gonna be very clear that we're asking for just about almost a 3% increase over the allowable tax levy. So we have to be very clear about that. So I know it might seem like you can just say, oh, we're just gonna say it's zero and, people will be happy with that. We have to show that we could be negative, we could be 2.91% below that. We have to communicate that to the community. So it's very, we have to do that. And there's stipulations of where we communicate that in our budget newsletter.
Right, and it has, when we adopt the budget, that resolution would have to be adopted at that time. So we will have to make a decision by our April 19th adoption. That language has to be in there, just like the language to adopt the budget. And then it has to be in our report card, our newsletter, and that will be the language on the ballot.
So
It
you
won't
have that.
just be, normally it's Proposition 1, vote yes for the budget kind of thing, yes or no. That whole
Yeah.
sentence that you have there, paragraph, will have to be on there. So the transparency is very clear.
And so some people might say, well, what's the downside of going out, asking for a supermajority for zero? If it gets voted down again, you're still at zero. I think we want to be true to the community and be clear where we could have been with them. I just think it's important that we are very clear, so that no one feels that, as if they were led to believe something different. A contingency zero is a little different, may not be, contingency zero is different than just a flat out, we're going at zero. So just so people understand that too, there are some restrictions on our spending. The board has to decide what's essential for the budget.
Essential spending.
Yeah, essential spending. So, it's not as easy as, oh, a zero is a zero, it's a zero. And then,
So
the-
we're at, sorry,
Go ahead.
I'm having the 0 to 0 to 0 thing. I'm having a hard time wrapping my head around it. So we're actually in a better position with a negative 2.91% than a zero being voted down, right? That's what you guys are saying?
then
Like, then if we,
possibly a contingent zero. Yes.
Right, because
Okay.
with the contingency budget, there are certain items that the state considers not essential. So we would have to go back through the budget and figure out what to take out if it's voted down,
okay,
okay?
I don't want to rush the zero conversation, but I did want to just talk about, so have been some questions, well, if we kept our faculty and staff full at the current levels, and, everything additionally that we need right now. So scenario 3 is if we had no reduction in force because part of this reduction in force is so that we can fund other program areas that need funding. So, programming, such as special education, there's a lot of professional development that we're required, to be working on right now. Purchases related to next generation standards, curriculum, professional development, their MTSS training and development. So there are a lot of, needs, especially professional development. We took all of our, so just to be very clear, we took all of our, a substantial amount of our professional development, our textbook costs, a few other, program supports, such as some software, some other work, some consultant work, that were required, and that we're working on doing. We've had to add some programming to special ed for our continuum. We have some needs there. So there's quite a bit of training that's involved. So next year, we will need to add back professional development. We'll need to add back some of these things into our general fund, actually also a partial AIS teacher, in order to get to that 771,000 to get that to zero. So those things are gonna have to be added back next year. That is going to be already, we're gonna have probably a 2 or 3% increase to our program budget just by putting some of that back in addition to contractual salary increases. Next year, that we project a 6% health insurance increase again after this year, 12%. So the challenge is, and we talked about this today at the faculty meeting, is that the allowable growth factor that we're allowed to use for the tax cap is 2% or CPI, whichever is lower. So right now, the rate of inflation is about 6%, CPI is around 6% currently, and we're only allowed to be at 2%. So these are the challenges. Everything's cost more. A lot of the things that we purchased and funded through ARP ended up costing more than what was originally planned. So, I just want to be clear that no matter what we do, we're going to be adding to our program budget already next year. And so, if we do go, so if we keep everything in, that's a 12.2% increase. And it's really 15%, almost 15% over the allowable. So, and we have to communicate that because we're really at a negative 2.9,
So this thing
Is the
would say that
allowable-
we were an increase of
almost 15%
almost
over
15%
the
over the
allowable.
allowable. Good.
Put that on there.
Yeah.
Yeah, this is revenue to revenue, this is
Right,
actual. to actual.
right.
Yeah. That's a good point.
So no matter what we do, we have to also, and so one of the things that I spoke about again today as well is, and I think I mentioned, is that one of our biggest opportunities and how we don't end up in this place again is that we really need to be looking at multi-year planning. Karen and I are working on that. Once we get this budget established, we're gonna go back in. We have a tool that we can use, and that we've just acquired through, it's an add-on to the current suite that we have, and we're going to, we'll put our history in, but then usually you will plan out about 4 years out of this, and then it's a living document, so then each year we keep adjusting and then planning out another year. So because I also think it's gonna be important is to look at what next year looks at like in the year after. We've eroded a lot of fund balance over the past few years, as well as, so we have a negative 2.91% this year. Our tax base is down 148,000. Last year, our tax base was down, where is it?
2.46.
2.46, which I think is about 120,000. So our tax base just over the last 2 years is about 260,000 lower than where we really could have been right now. I think hindsight's 2020, but in order to avoid this, we've got to start looking. I know it's important to be in the moment because we've got to fulfill those needs, but we also have to look at the future and sustainability.
That's where some of that strategic planning is coming in.
Yes.
For the 18.
Yes, exactly. And I think what will be helpful is that, and I did talk to the faculty and staff today about that, is that having as many people involved in that as possible, people from the community, our faculty, our staff, our leadership, because this will help focus us on our priorities. We'll make funding our priorities. That will be something that we'll have our mind on. We can project out what that looks like, what that costs. We can make decisions ahead of time instead of being in that moment of, okay, now what do we spend our money on? Or we're gonna commit to spending money on 5 different areas. And so we're gonna have to look at really what's essential. I think we can rebuild. One of those is just really being mindful and building some fund balance and efficiencies. So Dan, you had asked about So there was, a few years ago, Karen, when we had a different, business manager, under the prior superintendent, there was an error that was made in the tax levy, correct,
Calculation.
calculation. And
Do you want percentage or how was it?
So it's my understanding that they did the calculation wrong. I don't know if they wanted to plug exclusions, because a lot of people think you can do that. I'm not sure. I think that's what they did wrong. It happened to be a year that New York State audited. They picked schools to audit and look over your levy. If you're smart, you work with the state while you're doing it, and then they won't come audit you. But, and they made them aware of the error at the time, but it was chosen to ignore it. So that's why last year we had to make up that difference, which was the tune of $228,000. So that ruling was that loss, and this year is because we have no exclusions. So that's the importance of doing the calculation right. If you want to budget or plug numbers or whatever somebody wants to call it, then I'm not the right person, because I won't do that. I'm not gonna come here and say, well, I thought we were gonna have to pay. It's just not the right.
And
thing.
it will catch up. It'll catch up.
If
It'll
you
catch up.
were to plug exclusions this year just to get it at zero, which you could easily enough do. I've even had consultants tell me, well, do you think you might use some money towards a capital project out of the general? I know we're not, right? I know that. Could you put it in there? Probably. But then guess what? The next year you have to minus that number,
Mhm.
right? And put it back in. And so it's just gonna roll forward. So if you do it right the first time, you're not gonna have that problem going forward.
Can you talk about what things give us exclusions? Because that was really our problem this year, was we didn't have any exclusions.
Correct. So exclusions are, they're very set in stone. If the TRS, Teachers Retirement Service or System, or the Employees Retirement System increases 2% or more, that difference between 2% and whatever it increases, you can use as an exclusion. Well, ever since the tax cap has gone into law, neither of those retirement systems has raised 2%. Funny, every year prior to that it did. The other exclusion is your debt service. So if we owe $500 for our building debt and we get $300 in state aid, that $200 difference that's coming out of taxpayers, that's an exclusion. That offsets your levy limit and gives you a little playroom. Well, this year, because our funding is so great, our state aid is higher than our debt. So our transportation's one debt, and your capital project is another debt. And I gave you guys the breakdown 2 meetings ago.
Mhm.
Our capital debt and our state aid comes to a negative $32,000, meaning we're getting more money than we have debt. So there's no exclusions. So we actually have a negative exclusion.
Mhm.
That when you have that, it goes to zero on the and she set that up and showed the faculty the calculation. But because we have so much state aid, because the state assumes an interest rate on your debt, and we were lucky enough to lock into a lower rate, that's why, even though our state aid ratio is 80.1%, still the aid can be greater than the debt. And that's what happened this year. Now, next year, we'll have our final cost report in. We'll have some debt fall off, and hopefully we will have some exclusions.
So that's, there was one final, that has just the one little post-it note on there. That gives you, under each scenario, the projection of 1 year right now.
But that's assuming
Next year.
that's assuming
No
everything's just the
exclusions.
same as this year.
But we would have,
So hopefully we will have some exclusions and that number will change, but that was just to give it, kind of like I do with the taxes on school tax. I keep everything for what we know this year. Going forward, that's what we did with that example. So all things being equal, that's your carry forward.
we're in a better situation than we could have been, because we've been fully funded this year on foundation aid. So that's helped improve the situation. it's fully funded and for the most part, this is gonna be it for a while. And Peter and I went to, a dinner where we had, all the financial, people from NISCUS, NISBA, and ASBO. That is the Association of School Business Officials. And they kind of talked about what's on the horizon. And, we're fortunate to be fully funded. We really won't go below that because it's called Save Harmless, but we probably we won't see a lot of growth. We do not have growth in our tax base. And so that's where we would see some of that in the near future, this growth in our tax base or growth factor. And so if anybody's interested, in the Q&A, I put a link, to some of the, financial information that's on our website and it shows the calculation that Karen's talking about. But our tax base growth factor is 1.0011. When you convert that to percent, it's 0.11%, which is it's just a little above zero. And so that's basically that flat growth to our tax base. So, some communities, they have, businesses coming in, they might have commercial properties, they might have a lot of construction or new construction going on that will add to their tax base. We're not in that situation currently, so we have to be mindful of that. Very much so, and that we've eroded our tax base the past few years. We've got to really rebuild that. It's hard when you're in 2 years at a negative. And then, but we really need to think about, the future and what's within the allowable levy and whether or not. So that's why this is going to be important for the multi-year planning, what we might need to look at. So it's really kind of strategy, just like you would do with your own personal finances. But it's something that we have to think about because I know what this school means to the community, but we have to start thinking about the future and sustainability. We really have to be looking at that.
And that growth factor set by the state, that's not something we come up with. We go on to the website and they tell us each school district's growth factor.
So what's the impact of like 2 years ago, Dollar General came in? Does that impact our?
It really didn't help, but what that does is disperse the expense, right? So you're not paying quite as much, or I'm not paying quite as much because they're picking up a piece, but it really didn't have an impact on our growth factor. I think you need more than a Dollar General to come in.
And so there's also some conversation right now among the Washington County superintendents. And so just recently, there's been some conversation. So you see a lot of the solar farms coming in and a lot of solar farms are going into other communities and getting exemptions for a certain amount of year. That will erode our tax base. So say you get a farm that has a fair amount of assessment and then they sell out to a solar farm, then we could lose that as part of our tax base for a few years, possibly get exemption. Well, and that's something that the county officials, Warren and Washington County, are really looking at right now, is whether or not to allow that or not.
Yeah, we had a discussion about that a few years back. When
We were lucky, we haven't had that in our
it was
community,
a
but,
while ago, and they decided not to.
right, but it's up for consideration
Right.
again.
Yeah, that was a discussion a while ago.
It's up for consideration again. So I think we just want to be cautious and understand that, our revenue, we're not going to see significant growth in our revenue in the near future unless something changes. Our enrollment is declining, not increasing. So it's something we need to be mindful of. So throwing a lot at you.
Yeah. Well,
Taking a bad day to quit sniffing a little.
So what,
All right.
So this is our last workshop unless we schedule another one.
So in last year's, we put all the positions back in, look at, that's what went up so
Okay.
much. Okay,
That's what I was trying to figure out. Thank you.
yeah.
You saw me go back and
I
forth.
think,
Thank you.
I think you mentioned something about there are some needs for hiring in different areas.
Yeah.
So like we're talking about, you know, some positions maybe going away, but there's some we have to hire.
Yeah.
Those are, we're required through some, like legally required to hire some
So,
of those.
in the area of special education, we have seen our needs grow significantly. So I guess I want to be very careful. This is not someone, made a comment at the last meeting that we're blaming this all on special ed. We're not blaming it on special ed. But, all districts see these ebbs and flows. There are a lot of requirements that we have under the law, in terms of free, it's called faith, free and appropriate public education and how we educate students. And we have seen a significant need over the past year and several anticipated additional out-of-district placements. One of the things is that, as the board knows, over the past few years, there's been a lot of discussion about really working on the continuum, and really there was not a lot of work on that. Since Mrs. Crandall's been here, we've really taken a hard look at that. It's a really educated guess as to what exactly that is, because you could have a family move in or a family
Yeah.
move out, with children that have significantly different needs. Right now, our estimate that next year, also with the increase that we're seeing from our providers in different, both private and public settings through BOCES, we would probably have about a $500,000 increase in terms of what we're looking to spend this year just on out-of-district placements. So maybe around 1.2 million-ish. We believe that there are some programs that we could create and work on here and kind of get the overall kind of cost of that. So again, it's not necessarily out-of-district, in-district, but we could serve that same group of students for maybe about, mid 900,000. So it would save us about 300,000 bringing them back, but that's the addition of one teacher, some TAs. We would be creating, so we have some need for a special class in grades 3 through 5 for next year and keeping the K through 2. We have some additional needs at the high school that are required through IEPs that require, in order for us to meet all of those obligations, direct consultant teacher, resource room, those types of things. We need to add a teacher to the high school, so that's 2 additional teachers. With just some programming. The other thing is instructional co-teach and or special class. We'll be adding depending on what the needs are. But we're looking at it, additional 2 teachers in special education and 4 teaching assistants. So that is increasing to this, it's a shift of our financial resources.
Yeah, that's a better.
It's reallocating, but what I feel is, if we can do this, it's keeping the money in our district as opposed to sending, either way, we're spending that money. It will also add a 0.6 speech, as well. But there's also, some billing that we can do through the county. We can utilize that person. We actually, right now, are using a consultant, to fill some of the caseload. We want to do that. So there's going to be almost a wash in that, but, we would be hiring a 0.6 speech. The other, thing that I would say is, as we get a few of these programs established, we have the opportunity or possibility, if it's the right fit, to tuition in some students as well. So, There's a
way
great-
I don't,
right?
There's a great need in the,
Way in the future, right? That's not way in the future.
maybe a year or two. So
Yeah.
really, my feeling is we need a year or two to make sure that we're serving our students well, our teachers. Now, and there's some upfront costs, again, there's training and professional development. We saw what happened in, a different program startup that we did not prepare teachers and, we ended up having on the back end, to do that professional development, bring in the resources, but I think it was a lot of frustration on the part of everybody, families, students, faculty and staff, and so we need to do it right if we're going to do it. So I wouldn't want to tuition in kids until I'm sure, but I would say 2 years, 2 to 3 years, depending on what the situation is. But there are placements right now. We have
Yeah.
kids that are not been placed for 6 months and the state, while they understand, they basically told us it's our responsibility to do it.
yeah, and I don't mean it. I'm
Right,
glad
no,
to
but
say
it is,
don't
I
mean it to be
appreciate,
saying
you want to
I'm
clarify that. yeah.
Blaming it on one
Yeah,
area or
yeah.
not.
But it
Just
is the
clarify.
reality of, we need to look at reallocating some of those funds. And obviously, it's a specific skill set and
Yeah.
certification we can shift. We do have, just so you understand, we do have 2 postings just because this is the time of year. We posted them as anticipated openings, so it's not, guaranteed, but we're posting for 2 teachers and we will shortly be working on teaching assistants for September. So that's, there's a variety of reasons that the program budget is higher. It's cost, it's professional development, it's training. And some of it's that special education programming. It's not all special education, but it is a
No.
fair amount.
And don't forget the health insurance.
Yes, health insurance is up 12%.
Yeah,
Yeah, impacts across the board, but the majority of that is in the program budget. So transportation, all of your instructional personnel and some of your non-instructional aides.
So the 6% increase, that's district. That doesn't.
That would be
that's
the
what our
following
increase
year.
is.
That would be the following. year.
BOCES is saying, our consortium is saying, they're looking at 6% next
For
year,
the
but
following
for
year.
next, yeah,
12%
Right,
for this year.
12% for 23, 24.
yeah, that's already established. the 12%.
6% for probably the 2 or 3 years after they're.
But I wouldn't count on that yet. It's way too early.
No, But in terms of multi-year planning, so the consortium right now has had 2 significant years of loss. And, they're depleting the reserves and more than they're comfortable with, and so
They're increasing.
putting.
And so what they do, when she talks about depleting their reserves, in the past few years, they've kept it around 3 and 4% because they buy it down per se, kind of like you buy your interest rate down on a mortgage. They take from their reserves to buy the health insurance down, and that's what has kept it so level for so long. And now they're like, the claims are exceeding, and so we're paying for it.
Mhm. And some of it's coming off of COVID and, but it's, again, there's a perfect storm.
It's not just our,
Things
it's everybody in
going
the
on, everybody
consortium is
in the-
12%. It's not just Salem.
So that's processing.
It is
And I know we've been processing it for a while, but it's still a lot to try to.
So Julian, if we stay with this, the negative 2.91%, how are we meeting the needs of the current IEPs of kids that are out there? And, as you know, in the reading area and just in general, like, is it, I know in theory, it's not going to affect anything, but can you just explain to
For
me
next
again?
year?
For next year, yes.
Say
So,
with the cuts.
Yes, with the cuts. What is that, what is the plan?
right, so a few things that we've been doing. So one of the things that we've been looking at is one of the things that's been a common practice is, so I wish I probably should have an illustration. I'm gonna make a little triangle here for RTI. And tier one is, the bottom, and that's your greatest percentage of students, and that's tier one, that's in your classroom supports. Students who are not responding to your in-classroom supports kind of go to a tier two, they're identified through a tier two, and, often, tier two can be serviced in the classroom with small groups, differentiation. And we have had the ability with our staffing for a fair amount of years, my understanding is to take a lot of those tiers two kids and pull them out. So we've been working on that. And then we also have tier three kids that have the most highest and intensive needs. Typically, those are the ones that you would serve with your specialized reading teachers, or it could be AIS reading teachers. So there's different reasons for reading needs. So through special education, those are students that can be identified. A lot of times they might have learning disability or other type of disability that affects them, and they might, through their IEP, have specialized reading on their IEPs. But we also serve students who don't have necessarily, not a student with a disability, and they just maybe need more help with their ELA, writing skills or literacy skills. So it's really identifying and looking at what those needs are. We typically have very small groups. We typically group by grade level. So we're really trying to look at how do we group kids, our students, with according to the skills and abilities that they need. Have efficient group sizes. Some of it's timing, some of it's efficiency of schedules. We've really been working on that at the high school. So we have 3 reading teachers. We have 1 AIS math teacher. And our high school teachers deliver the AIS math at the high school. So I think especially at the high school, really looking at how do we deliver AIS? How do we deliver interventions? We're looking at curriculum at the elementary that has intervention components that can be useful at tier 2. New York State has started, and you'll see in the ARP grant, if you look at the language, I talk about utilizing a lot of that ARP money for multi-tiered system of supports, which is serving students in those tiers at all levels along the way. So, we brought in a consultant this year. We're working on our curriculum tools. We're working on our data tools. So it's as opposed to teachers having to do a lot of work on their own collecting data or trying to figure out what data to use to group kids. We're acquiring tools that will help us identify kids, put them in groups, look at ideal class composition to really help support and differentiate according to needs. But, the bottom line is when we look at the number of kids, I believe that, from initially what we looked at, we can serve our kids K-12 with their reading needs. Some kids also are in reading classes or AIS classes, and as they transition out, once they get the functional reading levels, we look at, does assistive tech help them, or is there an IEP or a 504 plan that can help them? So there are other accommodations or modifications that we can utilize, but typically a student isn't in reading. If they're in reading in 4th grade, they're probably not going to be there until 12th grade if we're doing our job correctly. So I think that's something that's really important. So sometimes people think, well, we're not eliminating reading at the high school. We're just reallocating our resources of teachers. So we also have some of this instructional consult, some of the special class we might be looking at would be able to deliver some of that to students within that through the special education setting. And we do have 2 special ed teachers that are certified in reading.
Okay.
That we haven't, one at the elementary, we've been utilizing partially to deliver reading, but not at the secondary setting. So as we hire that second person, that's also a skill set we may want to look at as well, as if, you can get someone with a dual certification that would be helpful. But we do have some opportunity, I think, to restructure and change a little bit how we schedule, because we do have, I don't know if people realize that, we do have some special education staff that is also.
So the two special ed positions we're hiring for, it's the 3-5 or 1-2, one of those. Two.
Right. So we're looking for 3-5. We'll be creating a program there. We do have it posted, so a teacher could, from within internally could want to take one of those positions, and one at 7-12, and then we would backfill them. So, we
So
do
it's
need,
3-5 and 7-12 that we're hiring.
right,
Okay.
7-12 would be,
Not a special classroom, like resource.
could be resource, direct, some,
Consultant
it
teacher.
depends on their skill set, again. There are some sections that we're going to be looking at serving, for specialized reading. Not sure if that would be our current teacher or maybe a new person, it depends on what they're. But I think it helps fill that need there. I think the biggest thing is that, we talked about this today. We can fill the needs. We're going to need to do some things differently. We're going to need to find some efficiencies. We're going to need to find some supports. But I think that is a, misconception that we're eliminating reading at the high school. We are not eliminating reading at the high school.
So this question is, do we need to have another workshop or we should, and be part of that?
Whenever
Do we have time?
So we have until the 21st, which is a Friday, but we have until the 21st to adopt a resolution.
Which is drop dead date, because then we still need to go to print and get it out there. We'd have to have that all ready, it's just without numbers.
We have it scheduled for the 19th, right?
Right now, we have it scheduled for the 19th. The earliest we would be, well, the 18th, we have strategic planning. So really, we could either have a workshop next week, or we could have a workshop on the 19th and then adopt that Friday,
Yeah.
Thursday or Friday.
You wanna think about it, and
I think we have a lot to digest.
I know.
Yeah. If I take this home and
And when
shoot
is,
for a while.
when is it getting back?
I believe Anne's back the 15th.
15,
Okay, Sunday the 15th.
yeah.
I'm not available on Monday the 16th,
Yeah.
so,
what else?
Sunday's the 16th.
oh yeah, Sunday's the 16th.
So it's possible that that 19th could get moved to the.
Well, or we could,
Or we could do a workshop
Workshop
on the
on the
19th, and 21st would be,
Drop dead.
but
so I think, what's the next step? Do you need more information?
I think they want to digest it.
Now we have these scenarios.
I know, I don't think I need more information, I just think
No,
I
I
need to
think it's time to
process.
think about these.
I have lots of information, I just need to process.
quickly, I think some of this, not blaming anyone, but it just, now we have full, like, these are really the three scenarios based on what, kind of our levy, and then things that we're hearing, as we talk to people, so having them all to really say, okay, well, these are our options, kind of, obviously there could be a should there be a plethora of options.
If you want more options,
But-
Dan.
No, I think it's good.
But I
that
think
you-
this gets, you know,
No, I get that you'd want to digest it and then maybe get back to Julie and figure out what you want to do next. I mean, as long
So
as we get it out there
just
for
to be
everybody to
clear,
know.
it's a matter of when the meeting would be.
Right.
So we need another workshop. Because really, you need to make a decision about what direction we would be
Where we need to
going
go.
in.
Yeah.
mhm,
What do you think, Peter?
Or
I don't think any of
we
us
could
are
have it
ready to.
next week,
make that
so
right now.
that's the other thing.
Yeah, I mean, we could do it next week without Ann as well. It just depends on what people are comfortable with. What do you guys want to do?
I mean, I think it'd be good to have Ann here too, for the full board. So maybe if we just make the 19th. That.
A workshop.
Make that a workshop and
would
make
be
the
easiest
the
thing to
20th
do.
could be our adoption
The
day.
20th, but that's the Thursday.
Yeah,
I think.
so we have that meeting, Peter, I think it's 3:30 to 5:30. We said we would just be going 2 hours, right?
Yeah.
So we could do it at 6.
Yeah.
Then, is that enough time for you to for us to put together the resolution and everything? We just have to put together then the resolution, correct? Gina?
Yeah,
Yep.
we have the resolution. It's just a matter of filling in the
Yeah,
numbers.
Right,
So-
right, and then we would do the adoption.
Yeah, that's our.
Okay,
As long
so
as
if we
Dan
have the
doesn't give
workshop
notice
on the
and everything.
19th,
I'm just
I mean, I
kidding.
can give you one
I'm
if you
just
want.
kidding.
but-
and then the special meeting.
We're just gonna
will be
live
to
here
the
this
20th.
That's all. That's fine. The
I
18th,
know.
18th, 19th, 20th, we're just gonna be here every night. We should just make dinner.
We're here anyway.
Okay, so I think that's the best route to take. That gives us time. If there's more questions that come up, we can get those answered. And
Yeah,
come back together, and then we can get Ann caught up.
Just let Julie know and we'll do
Yeah.
whatever, me, whatever.
Yeah.
Does that work? All right. That work with you?
Generally.
Does everybody
Yeah,
else in?
I think so.
I think old ones.
Yours?
I do too, yeah.